Thursday was the official day of remembrance for those who gave their lives in the wars of our nation. But today is the day set aside by the Legion for churches to honor those who served. For the past week or so, there have been moving stories in the newspapers and on TV of the heroes, the art and the poetry, and the graveyards with perfectly manicured lawns and acres of white crosses standing stark against the sky. We take pride and delight in the grizzled warriors of long ago battles, and we honor the dead. We lower the flags, hopefully, and attend services at the cenotaph and wear our poppies. There is so much to admire and celebrate in all that this day represents. The 11th of November was selected for Remembrance Day because the First World War ended in the signing of the Treaty of Versailles on the 11th day of the 11th month at the 11th hour in 1918. It was the war to end all wars, as H.G. Wells so famously wrote. But it proved not to be. More wars and more deadly wars and wars in all parts of our world were to follow, and peace remains the elusive goal of all. World War I was the war that commenced for the entire British Empire on the 4th of August 1914, when Germany did not withdraw from the occupied territories of Belgium, as had been demanded. It also marked the last time when Canada was committed to war as being a part of the Empire. After that, our Canadian Parliament would make their own decisions on declarations of war. When war was declared that August, everyone was confident that this squabble with Germany would be over by Christmas. During the war, 619,000 young Canadians signed on for the adventure and joined the Canadian Expeditionary Force. 61,000 of them would die, and 170,000 would be seriously wounded. The war itself claimed 20 million military and civilian deaths, with another 23 million wounded military personnel. The promise of a quick resolution to the war was not to be. The soldiers did not get home for Christmas. It was 4 years later when they laid down their arms and boarded ships for Canada. But many were left behind, beneath the grass and the poppies of Europe. And many others came home haunted by what they had seen and done. Others came home to hospitals that they would never leave. And the mustard gas and the bullets and the hideous conditions of the war and the ensuing Spanish flu left many with a legacy of scars and damage that a lifetime could not heal. In the homes from which they had so proudly marched to defend king and country, there was an empty seat at so many tables. Wives widowed, children bereft, parents devastated. It was not the war that ended war. And it was not the first nor the last. Since storytellers first gathered listeners around the campfire, the tales of wars waged, lands taken, and the valor of those who fought have been recorded and passed from generation to generation. The names of the bravest of the soldiers and the gods, of the Romans and the Greeks, Mars and Ares, Genghis Khan of the Mongols, and the Incan Emperor Pachacuti are known to this day because their bravery and exploits were praised, recorded, and they inspired others to follow in their footsteps. The Old Testament too records scores of wars and tales of God's interventions. Whether triumph was attained by carrying the Ark of the Covenant about a city while blowing trumpets and concluding with a shout that brought down the walls of Jericho, or the drowning of the Egyptian army to facilitate the escape from Egypt, or century after century of battles over Jerusalem and the lands of Israel. The repeated crusades of the Christians to reclaim the Holy Land in the second millennium produced great leaders, heroes, and villains. Coupled with warring Christians fighting other Christians rather than the Muslims who controlled the lands, even today, the world blazes with battles between religions over textural differences, power, and real estate. And so it continued. Wealth, property, influence, featuring many of the decisions to take up arms. Too often, old folk sending young folk to die in a call to patriotism, adventure, and glory. In 1914, at the age of 15, my father attempted to enlist in the Canadian Forces, lying about his age not once, but 3 times, and each time his father tracked him down and dragged him home, with my father devastated at having lost his chance for adventure and going off to see the world. Chance and mischance, decisions that changed the future of both nations and individuals. Politicians declaring war, officers directing the battles and deciding which units to send to the front lines and on which ships they would sail. Inventors of poison gas and military aircraft for scrimmages in the sky, and flamethrowers, tanks, and trenches on the ground. And the youngsters who were accepted into the army and those rejected. How many sleepless nights and lifetimes of regret, or memories cherished, do those numbers represent? But more importantly, the women who would never find husbands, the children who would never be born, the sons growing up without a role model, and daughters whose father is known only in a fading picture of a young man in uniform, and letters sent home and cherished. Did their numbers include a Shakespeare, an Isaac Newton, a Banting or Best or a Veronica Tennant? What great work of art, what scientific discovery, what step into space, environmental innovation, or the clue to eradicate COVID before it spread, lies buried with those stolen youth, those who never returned to their homelands or had time to create families. Soldiers, described by John McRae in Flanders Field as those who once lived, felt dawn, saw sunsets glow, loved, and were loved. I am convinced that most of those who march off to war from all countries, all denominations, all backgrounds and educations believe that what they are doing is right and good. They have faith in the wisdom of the decision makers, the righteousness of the cause, and the great worth of their nation, regardless of the side on which they fight. There are great values worthy of defending at any cost. Freedom of speech, equality, faith. But too often war is about lesser things: revenge, power, land, corruption, greed, even slavery. Until we can find better ways, the option of war and power remains. But surely we have great incentive to be peacemakers and not warmongers. The stakes have risen from clubs and spears to nuclear weapons with robots launching the rockets. We must accept that the reality remains that there are times when a just war must be supported, lest tyranny reigns and humanity lost. But there are no greater proponents for peace than the veterans. They have seen the pain and the horror of war. They have seen the shattered and broken lives of those forever affected from both the battlefield and the attempts to reintegrate once the battles end. They, more than any, echo the great classic spiritual, Down by the Riverside, which promises, "Gonna lay down my burden, down by the riverside, ain't gonna study war no more." The words of that song are anchored in the words of Isaiah. "And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more." God seeks to guide us toward peace and harmony and turn us to caring for one another, not studying war to destroy others. And this is our prayer this day as we remember those who gave their lives, whose lives were changed forever, and all those who loved them. Let us study peace and find in love the solutions that war has never provided. Lest we forget those who sacrificed and died for this land, its values, and who gave their yesterdays for our todays. So may it be. Amen. As remembrance honors conclude, and we place our poppy on a cenotaph or altar, let us commit ourselves to being informed and caring and acting when and where we can to support the peacemakers, oppose the villains, and bring awareness into the darkness that blights lives and leads to war. Go forth in peace and in remembrance.